No, it's take it away. I guess we can follow you, please.
Thank you so much. I'm going to, I'm following some notes, otherwise I will get too distracted. I'll have to do this from my height. Can everybody hear me now? Better? Okay. My thanks to Yuji and everybody that made this possible at Oregon State for inviting me here, and I've spent a whirlwind week working hard, and hopefully having a successful end to this by signing tomorrow. I want to give a special shout out to the advanced print students who gave so generously of their time and good humor to help me print this edition here. Without you guys, this would have not happened, period. So I've geared, oops, I'm accidentally doing something, pressing the wrong direction. So let me go back. Oh. Nothing like starting off incorrectly. Okay, here we are. I've geared my presentation to how my work developed over time, starting with an image from graduate school, which Yuji, thank God, didn't tell you what year it was. It was many decades ago in a galaxy far away. Generally, my work habits are slow and steady, and probably, truth be told, conceptually overthought out. One of my big challenges has been to make the work look fresh after spending way too many hours making it. It's been a constant problem, but I keep on going on nonetheless. However, I wanted to start this lecture with one of the many signs that I saw during a month-long professional visit to China in 2007. So this is one of the signs that I saw in China, visit there in 2007. I or other Westerners can only guess at its real meaning. Communication is always challenged by differences in language, culture, and era. Obviously, much can be lost in translation, even when we're staring at the information. So keep this in mind when I get to my more current work, because that's what I really deal with now. But first, a brief history. So I graduated from the University of Arts in Philadelphia with an undergraduate degree in graphic design and a minor in printmaking. I loved both. I worked as a designer for a short period before deciding to get my MFA in printmaking at San Francisco Art Institute, since we were then living in California. This body of work dealt with ritual and introspection. It also addressed the physical and psychological aspects of body language, concealing and revealing. This is a color lithograph from 1974. For those of you who are, I don't know how many in the audience really know what a print is, and I just quickly explain something without getting too technical. But prints are images that are multiple originals, and this is called an edition. All the work you see here will either be an editioned print or a mixed media drawing that is unique, but that incorporates some printing method. So those are the two kinds of works that I've been dealing with. If anybody has any questions afterwards, please feel free, but I hate to get too technical for a presentation. The notion that body language and how we view it is developed into creating an isolated space in which a figure or figures exist. That space most often resembles a stage where an unidentified drama was in progress, an ambiguous relationship between a public external space and a private internal space. And this is a color lithograph from an edition in the mid-70s called Journey 1. This one's called Observer 3. These are all multicolor lithographs that are hand-drawn and printed. And this one's called Maxine. I've been drawing from the same model for many years, and this is the first time I used her name because she's completely concealed. So during this this time, I was also making drawings as a separate and distinct entity. This one's called Untitled Boa. I did a lot of Untitled for many decades, and that eventually morphed into very specific titles, which I'll talk about as we go. And this is another small drawing from 1987. But slowly, my concerns of private and public interaction changed to a balancing act between personal internal feelings and external societal expectations that can often lead to contradictory actions and conflicting emotions. I was frustrated at not being able to visualize these dualities in my current framework of representing real space to explain a concurrent conflict. So this is called The Beginning. It's a lithograph, an edition print. And the way I addressed talking about concurrent realities was to imagine a space with a projected image in it, because I couldn't figure out. I was still working with a pretty reasonable, realistic picture plane. So at some point in the early 90s, my picture plane did break apart, and this allowed me to address things happening at once, and it wasn't a realistic space anymore. This is called Silence. It's a edition print lithograph. No Moment in Which to Forget. Also a hand-drawn lithograph. Night and Day, which is a drawing. Sitting Pretty, it's a lithograph. This one is pretty large. It's about 38 inches wide, from the early 1990s. And this one's called Swing Time, which gets its title from the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers classic movie Swing Time, and that's actually a still of Ginger Rogers dancing backwards and then heels. This kind of structure also allowed me to additionally combine the two methods of imagery previously separate, my prints and my drawings. I could use parts of those already printed elements from the editions and proofs and reimagine them with additional drawing in another context. It allowed me to address more thoroughly the notion of concurrent realities and comment on themes of expectation and reality, the ideal and the everyday. And so if you take a look at this, there's a litho part on the right side, and in proofing it, I had different, it was all black, some were darker, some were lighter, and I took some of those proofs and then added drawing to them, so that this was the first time I was really starting to incorporate my drawings and prints together. This one's called Sanctuary, and it's 60 inches wide. Since I've used the same model in all of my work up to this point, which is the late 1990s, I had inadvertently, over the course of time, accumulated an archive of a woman aging, which was very convenient source material to an artist dealing with getting older. My imagery also started changing as I entered middle age, because my daughter, who's now 41, started emerging as a young, independent woman herself. She started dealing with similar gender issues that I thought would have changed by the time she grew up. And it made me start to think generationally, the difference between how she grew up, a product of a mother who matured in the heyday of the 60s with a strong women's movement, and how I grew up in the 50s, the product of a mother who experienced the Great Depression, World War II, and whose role as wife and mother was to stay at home and bring up the kids. So due to this developing concept, in about 2000, there was a visual departure as well. I added silkscreen to my lithographs using appropriated material, and I started deriving the title from the text of some of the appropriate imagery that I was using. Up until then, most of my titles were untitled and in parentheses some description, so I could figure out what it was. So this is one of 4 diptychs. It's called Can't Always, in parentheses, Be Prepared. And this one's called Emergency Measures. And I had my Girl Scout handbook available. I've been collecting vintage educational and instructional manuals for a really long time. And I was going through it, and there's this wonderful diagram on the left of emergency measures where I don't know, if somebody bakes while they're camping. I have no idea why you'd want an equivalency of a cup for a hand, but this just struck me as incredibly funny. And I'm in middle age at this point, and I decided that's not an emergency measure. Other things are. So that got me thinking on a whole new direction of this intergenerational idea of what's normal in one generation is not particularly the same in others. So this one is the first one. The backgrounds are the same. This one's called Can't Always Be Prepared, Young at Heart. And of course it's Marilyn Monroe, who, since she died young, will always be remembered as young and never age. And then that's the reality on the left. There are 2 more in that series that I won't show you at this point, but if anybody's interested, they're all on my website. This one's called Two Hands Are Better Than One, which was the caption under the photo at the right, and I have no idea why one woman would want to use both hands to clean a table. So this is my idea of what 2 hands would be better at, and this one is called Sorrow. 2 Hands Are Better Than One. This one's called Passion. These are both from about 2000. And then I did a series, my bed series, which this one's called Do You Air the Bed Each Morning? Comes from a manual on checking steps about making your bed. And the whole idea of a bed actually was really interesting to me because usually born in or close to a bed, on a bed, you die in one. Your whole life is in the middle of it. It has to be made by either people at home or in the service industry. People have intimate relations on bed. It's, for me, a pretty loaded symbol. So I used these steps in making a bed to make other comments about societal expectations and things like that. The concept of intergenerational differences expanded again into thinking about general information delivery systems when in 2002, this series, Synthetic Phonic Word Method, was exhibited in a university gallery. And there are these are each 2 by 3 feet. And the combination is sewing sexy, vacuuming voluptuous, laundry lover, and cooking kissing. And the top parts of those images are taken from a book to learn language in school, your first language book. And the diagrams indicate the sounds. And when I was going through with a group of students, nobody could figure out what the V sound was, which is, I think, let's see if it's the next one. So, anybody here figure out what that diagram is? So, it's a trolley with a scooper for horse manure, so that the manure would be kept off the tracks. So this got me really thinking. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. These images originated from a beginner's grammar text published in 1900. So the pictorials used to illustrate the very sounds to develop language were apparently old enough that the reference to the source was lacking. What was assumed to be common knowledge among school children over 100 years ago to teach writing skills had been lost to most contemporary audiences today, even though you were looking at that image. So as with all grade school grammar texts, all visual clues are kept neutral. That is, there's never any suggestion of the sexual, which is obviously appropriate. However, that's precisely my point in these images. I wanted to use those structures of building language and make counterpoints. My illustrations are of women working at traditional female tasks: sewing, doing laundry, cooking, cleaning. I paired them with a sexual or sensual word component using that same consonant sound to include another view to the physical, namely a woman's sexual side. So up to this point, my imagery incorporated information both inspired and provoked by text and images found in early and mid-20th century publications, with subjects such as home management and decoration, health, education, and home repair. These dated pictorials and accompanying text summoned up feelings of both nostalgia and horror at how far women's roles had advanced and how much they have really remained stagnant. While focusing on that premise, I now started incorporating a language and communication component into my work. And this one's called The Beggar Maid. So this somehow is the throwback to the first slide of the translated Chinese into English sign. This one's called The Beggar Maid. And what it is, it's the text of the Alfred Tennyson poem, but does anybody know what that mark making is? I don't know if you can see it in this slide. It's not sign language. It's shorthand. So, which is totally non-existent. But if you're somebody my age, I never learned it, but I know a lot of women who, that's what you did as a secretary. It's a way of making marks by listening to sounds. So it's a shorthand way of transcribing words. And this came out of a shorthand textbook. So here you have an example of the entire poem of Tennyson's right in front of you, and unless you were a certain age with a certain experience, you can't figure, it's opaque. You really can't understand it. And I really like that idea of seeing something that is in front of you and it's still not available to you completely. And so at this point, I also started looking at toile wallpaper designs. The romanticization of domestic history is particularly marked in toile wallpaper patterns, and thus it integrated pretty well into my work. Toile wallpaper romanticizes, obviously, domestic history, and I do not think there's anything romantic about doing housework. You can get my drift here. I seem to be in the same concept all the time. Some of my work started taking on a denser quality of information and pattern, using toile wallpaper details directly. This is a lithograph and silkscreen edition print called Gentleman's Quarters, and it comes from actually that rawhide mustard colored thing. It was the title of the wallpaper book, Gentleman's Quarters. So, this one's called May I Make a House Too? This is from about 2010. If you look carefully, it's pretty bright here, but if you look carefully, there's some toile image in the background. No, no, Janet, be good. So from 2010. These are drawings, mixed media drawings that have a printed element with drawing on top. This one's an edition print called Calvin Always Likes to Lick the Spoon. Hopefully there's a sense of humor in all this, otherwise you can come on. It's a little heavy-handed. I've also been incorporating digital material into my work. So I have sort of two kinds of work. I've been lucky enough to work with a printer in Bern, Switzerland for more than a dozen years. And we first create a digital background onto which I continue to draw when I bring it back to my Ithaca studio. So these digital images are appropriated and manipulated from sources such as old photos and children's textbooks. So the first layer, which I do in Switzerland with this printer, is digitally reproduced on printmaking paper, and then I just take it back and continue drawing. This one's called Susan Liked to Sleep. And the photo from it, this is a full-size sheet of paper, it's pretty big, 22 by 30. When we were rummaging, I bring a lot of work to scan and reproduce, but we also start looking for work locally, and Tom found a bunch of old photographs in his studio left behind like a dozen years before, and somebody was in an audience in the mid-50s taking tiny little photographs with those little white edges on them, apparently of costume dramas. So we grabbed a bunch of those, and those were the first images on the paper. This one's called Belle de Jour, 2012. Heavenly Bodies, so from the same year. And Everything He Wants. So these all started through Photoshop that were heavily manipulated and then added to by drawing on. So of course I'm still making some additions, though less often. This is one of them called Today I Am an Airline Pilot, which is a lithograph and silkscreen. Tim's Wonderful Day, lithograph and silkscreen. And Avoid Meaningless Words. This is an edition I made at the Hartford Art School in Connecticut when I was there for a week making small editions. So those were all prints. Here are some examples of my drawings. And again, I always start these images with a printed layer. And these are images now. I'm just going to go through a bunch. They're from 2014 up to last month. So, Safe Concentration. Good Health Habits. Unconscious of Their Fate, 2015. Think About What You're Going to Do. History Can't Be Rewritten. Learns Much About the World. Inquiry. Where Are You? Disturbance. These are actually now from 2017. Morning News. This comes actually, you can't really see it, but this poor woman's lawn mowing in her, I don't know, I wouldn't mow my lawn in that outfit, but her husband or somebody is in the background on the chaise lounge reading the newspaper. That's why the title, Morning News. Into the Air, 2017. Discovering Our World. Wonder Woman. Wonder Women, sorry. The Rest of the Story. Guardian. It's called Beginner's History 1 and 2. It's a diptych, and each one's a full-size sheet of paper, about 22 by 30. Passing By. And Voyage, which I finished about 2 weeks ago. And I'll just end with, everybody's always curious as to what my studio looks like. That's it. I am really very privileged to have an absolutely incredible studio at home. It's in my basement. I have a wonderful press. And that's where I live. So I appreciate you all coming. It's an enormous crowd. Thank you very, very much. Yes.
Are you using the stone or metal plate?
So I started out on stones, and I had my own. I was lucky to have them, and I probably abandoned them 30 years ago for 2 reasons. One is they're heavy, and I know everybody who has stones does not have a good back. And secondly, probably more importantly, the flexibility that stone allows for scraping and doing things and washes, and these are techniques that you can use on a lithographic stone, I wasn't using. And so by changing over to plates, I was allowed to get larger, which is what I wanted to do. And I'm always just drawing with a pencil or something, so I didn't need the versatility of a stone, and it was just safer and just more convenient. I must say I had to mourn selling my stones. They're beautiful, organic pieces, and it's very cathartic to grind it down and start again, but I just reallocated. That's why I gave them up. So, anybody else? Yeah.
When you said you do a lot of drawing on your prints, so you do print with lithography first, and screen print, and then do the drawing?
It depends on where I need color and how it, I mean, there's no formula. I very seldom start with a plain piece of paper. As you can see, there's always noise or something in the background. So it's either a digital image, which I start in Switzerland, or if I'm home and I'm working, there's a technique where you can roll up you can print from a photocopy, and you can get large size photocopies at Staples. So I am getting same size photocopies, so sometimes the photocopy is as big as a full piece of paper, and I can roll that up with a color. They actually go back quickly to, sorry about that, Morning News. So that's 22, it's a full-size sheet of paper, and that's how big the photocopy is, and you can gently roll it up and then print that. And then, so that's essentially my background, and then I start drawing on top.
And you usually draw with pencil, or what other materials?
I draw with pencil. I use acrylic inks, watered down or full. I roll up plexiglass sheets and draw into them and print. So I do anything that I have to do to get the image on there how I hope it would look. And as anybody who's taken a printmaking class, what you think it's going to be and how it turns out is most often never ever the same, even after decades of working on it. And the people who were working on it with me this week know that for sure. So at every stage you develop an image. The way I work is I'm obviously not spontaneous, so I have an idea of what's going on, and actually by the time I know the size of my print, I've usually drawn out an outline on a tracing pad, so nothing moves by the time it gets on my paper. And then the challenge is trying to make it work how I think it should. So at every stage you develop an image, you put down information, and then you have to say, is this working? Is it working well? Is it working well enough for me to continue? Do I tear it up now? I keep on joking with friends of mine that it's a good thing we're not heart surgeons because nobody's dying during this process. But it's a constant evaluation. situation of trying to figure out how to, get something to work. And, if it does come close to what you're doing and you know that you just don't want to do any more to it, then you start again. So there's no real progression of how things work. I go back and forth, and a lot of times the grease of one technique doesn't match the water of another, and I discovered that in process that you sort of have to beat yourself up to make it work.
And it seems like there is quite a bit of spontaneity in your process, actually, and that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, the spontaneity is just, the spontaneity is trying to overcome what you should be doing. That's where it's spontaneous. But it's not, my concepts are usually pretty well developed, so I know what I'm aiming for, except you have to accept a lot of things along that route. And a lot of times things do morph a bit, obviously. I don't think I've ever made an image that was exactly what I thought it was going to look like. Anybody else? Yes?
How do you exhibit these? Are they matted and framed, or how do you like to see them?
So I have this arrangement with the printer in Switzerland, who is a contract printer. He's actually an expat American who moved to Switzerland 30 years ago. And it's a long story how we met, which we won't go into, but so I go there and start these projects with him most often, and then come back and finish them up within a year and a half or 2 years. And then I go back with a huge tube of rolled up work. And since I'm so compulsive, he allows me to help him frame my show. So I have a show there. So in the 13 years we've been working together, I've had 4 solo shows there. So those are framed to the extent that they fit on the walls. The rest are put in bins. I've had work. I don't have that many galleries that represent my work. So one of them hangs them up, just with clips, which is fine with me because we have a good relationship, and you have to trust whoever's doing this so they don't get damaged. Obviously, I'd like to see them most often just framed very plainly, just for protection, because they are on paper. But that gets expensive. So, anybody else?
When you're appropriating imagery, do you have ground rules for yourself about what's okay to do and what's not okay to do?
So that comes up a lot. This was about appropriating imagery, and there's something called the fair use law, which I'm sure I'm right in the middle of. I take imagery wherever I relate to it. So textbook, 1900, I think the copyrights run out. They're all instructional materials. A lot of my imagery also comes from fashion magazines, which obviously are current. But what I'm doing is taking that image, redrawing it in detail, or parts of, or sections of, or even if I take it whole, but I'm reinterpreting it, making it a parody. And once you change the context of any of that material, it's fair game. So I'm pretty sure I'm safe. At least I'm hoping I am. Okay.